So, how about all those great moves the Boston Celtics made? No, but seriously, I'm here to talk about the Celtics trade deadline and also kind of where the Celtics stand about halfway through the season, a little more than halfway through the season. And this was like the one trade deadline where, and I'm probably going to contradict myself a couple times here, this is like the one trading deadline I can remember with the Celtics where I'm not that mad that they didn't do anything. I mean, I'm not surprised they didn't do anything. They usually don't. Last year they did get Isaiah Thomas, which was a move that kind of, in a way, signaled that the rebuilding was kind of going, in a better direction. Up until the Isaiah Thomas trade, the Celtics were just trading players to get picks, and they were trading those picks to get more picks. So what you have now is a team with the Celtics who have a ton of draft picks, and some of them are admittingly promising as far as the Brooklyn Nets picks, which could be top 5, probably will be top 5 picks. So, there's that. And then you look at it, a team that has that many draft picks usually isn't very good. And the Celtics, I'm not fooling myself here. I know the Celtics aren't a top 4 or 5 team in the NBA, but they're still very respectable. And they're the 3rd team in the East behind the Raptors and the Cleveland Cavaliers. So that was surprising. From that vantage point, I could understand why fans would want to trade. If you're the Celtics, why you'd want the Celtics to go for one of those star players, like an Al Horford, like a Dwight Howard, or even one of those offshoot rumors of Blake Griffin or Kevin Love. But, I don't know, you kind of had to know that those weren't going to happen. But I could understand, just because the Celtics are in kind of a good position for the time being, you could understand fans wanting a big name, and I kind of wanted a big name. This was one of those rare situations where I would have been okay with the Celtics acquiring a star, and I'm okay with them not acquiring a star. Like, the team has been really fun to watch. I know that sounds cliche to say, and, when they're not winning championships, you kind of, trick yourself into liking it. You're like, oh, well, they're not winning, but it's kind of fun. But, it really is. I know that they're not going to win the championship. I know, best case scenario, they probably make it to the 2nd, maybe 3rd round of the playoffs, maybe even 1st round, but right now they're the 3rd seed in the East, and they've kind of done it very quietly. The Celtics haven't been an overwhelming team for most of the season until recently, where they've won 13 of their last 17 games. And actually what's kind of frustrating is the games they have lost. They've lost games to the Knicks and the Magic and just kind of teams that you figure they should beat. And then they beat the Clippers. But anyway, it is kind of unusual. But getting back to the trade deadline, it was weird too, because normally I'm of the belief that you trade prospects to get the sure thing, especially in baseball and in basketball. If you have these draft picks and they can get you a number 1 player, like a good type of player, like a Kevin Love, I say go for the player. The draft picks are great. They could be promising. They could not be. You might get the next, great player in the draft, but you might not. There are plenty of examples of top 5 picks that were okay or not even that good. I feel like the Celtics have a team. Well, they have Marcus Smart, who's a top 6 pick. They have a team that seems like they're a bunch of draft picks. Other than Isaiah Thomas, you have, Jay Crowder, Jared Sullinger was a 1st-round pick. You have a bunch of players that have upside, but for the most part haven't really realized that upside. Avery Bradley's turned into a pretty good defender. You have, the people on the Celtics, if you're a Celtics fan watching this. So, there's not a lot to, hate about this Celtics team, but, obviously, once they play a team like the Cavaliers or even the Raptors, they're challenged. They're probably not going to win that series, but, you have to like what Brad Stevens has done. And I'm of the belief, and I'm hoping I'm right on this because it would be nice to see, I'm of the belief that the Celtics could maybe get a free agent this offseason. One of the reasons they might not have traded for Dwight Howard or Al Horford is because they think they can sign them in the offseason. I don't know if that's true. I'm confident that they will try to. Kevin Durant's obviously a huge name that's out there that's going to be a free agent this offseason. Be interesting to see where he lands, but part of the reason why I'm okay with the Celtics not, trading assets for these players is because, I don't know, there's an offseason for a reason. The trade deadline, it's great to get caught up in it. It's toward the, second half of the season, so you're kind of let's make a push for the playoffs, or let's, sell pieces or whatever. There's always this big crossroads. The Celtics have opted to stand pat, but that doesn't mean they're done trading, and, in the offseason they could still make a move. But really, what I think they should do is try to get one of these free agents. I think they have a good core now, or a good, backup, but they need the main piece, obviously. They need the Dwight Howard, they need the Kevin Love, whoever it is. And Kevin Love, for whatever reason, and I don't know how true this is, I feel like he just doesn't want to come to the Celtics. Like, I feel like the Celtics have tried to trade for him. They've tried to get him to come as a free agent on multiple occasions, and it just seems like, Love has toured Boston briefly. I think him and Rondo hung out once during an offseason, and there was all this speculation that Kevin Love's going to come to Boston. Even last year when, the Cavaliers re-signed him before that, it was like, oh, would he consider coming to Boston? I just don't think he will. Like, I just don't think Kevin Love wants to come to Boston. I mean, if you had traded for him, you'd have no choice, but I'm just saying, I just don't get the impression that Kevin Love wants to come to Boston at all. Like, I don't know. I mean, again, I don't know if it's the city or the fact that, they don't have a LeBron James, but Kevin Love does not seem like the kind of player that wants to come to Boston. And a lot of players kind of seem that way, at least because they don't come here, but part of it is because the Celtics also don't really try for free agents. So, I mean, if you're solely relying on trading to build this team, that's going to be tough, because even though you have all these draft picks, it's tough to really get a good player with a few second-round picks and a couple of first-round picks. You'd have to really trade one of those high draft picks, and even then you get a player like Horford or Howard that could be gone in a year or so. So, to build a long-term sustainable franchise, it's tough to do it just through trades. And if you can't get free agents to come, it's going to be just, that's what you're going to have to do, is do trades. So, this year for the Celtics is to me a success on the surface. They're not going to win the championship. They could win in the neighborhood of 50 games, though, which would be impressive. So to me, if you want to look at this rebuild as a continuum, and let's face it, it rarely is, but in this case, the Celtics have been rebuilding kind of in a healthy way. They started as a lousy team. They got better last year, and they're better this year. So maybe we're taking a step forward here, and maybe a free agent sees that, and, like an Al Horford sees that the Celtics are willing to pay him the max amount, and also have a good team. Maybe he sees that and comes here, and, then you got something, because you got Al Horford, and you have a high draft pick that you can put with him, and the players you already have. It's all just kind of optimism, but I don't know. It's the trade deadline. Not much happened around the league in the NBA, so I think like one or two trades happened. The Celtics weren't in any of them, despite all the rumors. And I guess that's the one disappointing part, as much as I say I don't care if they get a player, and I don't. But at the same time, it feels like for the last 3 years now, it's been the Celtics. Oh, they're going to get a big deal done. They've got all these draft picks. They're going to get a big deal done. And then nothing. Then they end up just drafting the players or just kind of not doing anything. So, I always thought it was a little naive to think that the Celtics were going to acquire all these assets and then flip them for a superstar. I just don't think it works that way. More often than not, you don't see that. I know what happened with Kevin Garnett and Ray Allen back in 2007, but I mean, that does not happen often, that you get one star player, let alone two. So, could it happen? Sure. It didn't happen this season, but maybe it could happen down the road where, like a James Harden or somebody becomes available and you just trade a bunch of picks for them, but I wouldn't count on it. If that's the plan, that's kind of a really weird plan, but I understand, you got to do what you got to do, especially if you can't get free agents to come to Boston. So, looking forward, hoping the Celtics have a good second half of the season, continue going on this path they're on, and we'll see what happens in the offseason. But as usual, the trade deadline brought pretty much nothing. So, I'd like to hear your comments on that, and go Celtics.